Dr. Peter Rabinowitz directs the UW Center for One Health Research, COHR. The center explores interactions between humans, animals, and their shared environment in a One Health paradigm. The center aims to help find out what the animals are telling us about our changing environment that we share with other species. One of the projects of the UW Center for One Health Research has been studying the effect of natural gas extraction activities on human and animal health. This presentation will illustrate application of the One Health approach through case examples. Peter Rabinowitz, MD, MPH, is professor, University of Washington Departments of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, Global Health, and Family Medicine. He is adjunct professor, UW School of Medicine, Department of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Dr. Rabinowitz received a BA from Amherst, an MD from the University of Washington, and an MPH from Yale. He's board certified in occupational and environmental medicine and family medicine. If you have a question for Dr. Rabinowitz, use the Q&A, mention Dr. Rabinowitz, and send it during his presentation. And now, Dr. Rabinowitz.
Hello, and welcome to this session. And what I'm going to be talking about is a One Health approach for assessing impact. We're talking health impact from oil and gas development. And my name is Peter Rabinowitz. I'm a professor at the University of Washington in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, where we also have a Center for One Health Research. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the One Health approach as part of all of this. So in the last decade and a half, we saw this increased in the intensity of development of shale, gas, and oil, and fracking technology, and the increased amount of production. There was naturally some concerns about would there be any health effects from this, and realizing that it not only involves drilling deep into the ground and the horizontal drilling and some of the fracturing activities and explosives and potential things in the groundwater. Also above the ground, there's a lot of kind of industrialized activity going on. This is a fracking well pad in Pennsylvania, and you can see that there's plenty of other exposures beyond the well themselves and the explosives. There's lots of diesel exhaust and off-gassing from the natural gas and things like that. So a wide range of potential health exposures, and would there be any real health impacts from these exposures? So as the science started to develop, about 8 years ago now, there was a study in Colorado by McKenzie et al. Looking really at what was known about the quantitative release of certain volatile organic compounds like trimethylbenzene, xylene, from the some of the natural gas processes, and doing a risk assessment of whether these releases and exposures over time would cause health effects. And they were able to calculate a certain amount of cancer risk and potential increase respiratory and neurological effects. But the big question is, are we seeing this in any populations from this kind of exposure, as well as other potential exposures of the fracking chemicals and other aspects of the unconventional extraction activities? So as this debate sort of continued, there was another angle to it, which is, are animals getting sick from this kind of natural gas exploration activities, fracking, and things like that? And there was a report in 2012 that was published where it was really a case report, but it was a case report of a number of animals, but often connected to case report in people as well. And these are animals and people living near natural gas fracking activities on the East Coast, as well as some outside the East Coast as well. And what was reported was a number of very concerning effects in the animals, such as certainly dermal irritation and things like that, respiratory effects, gastrointestinal diarrhea, not eating well, things like that, neurological changes, reproductive changes, especially in the animals where there was reproductive failure, there were birth defects and things like that. And it brought up the whole issue of what can human health people make of a bunch of observations in animals? You know, how do we interpret that? And should we only be looking at the animals and somebody else should we only be looking at the people and somebody else should be looking at the animals? Or should we take a little more of an integrated approach to the whole situation? And that is the concept of One Health, where we really talk about professionals who deal with humans as well as professionals who deal with animals and the environment, all kind of coming together to coordinate, communicate, collaborate, to figure out sort of what's going on to make this a healthier planet with better outcomes for both people, animals, plants, and the environment. And the idea that working in this integrated way would be better than working in silos. And that even though the One Health concept really came about partly because of zoonotic emerging infectious diseases like SARS coronavirus 2, like MERS, like bird flu, like a number of other emerging diseases over the last several decades, this One Health sort of integrated approach to human, animal, and environmental health is something that really can be applied to more toxic issues like oil and gas exploration. And One Health can be thought of as really a systems approach, that just as we always have thought about systems with human health, where we think of that individual patient that we're seeing as part of a larger system that involves their family and community and society, and the environment also as a system that involves sort of local environments, but also kind of the wider community and regional, national, and global environment. But bringing in the idea that we are constantly in contact with animals at different levels of complexity. It could be an individual animal, it could be a group of animals, and those animals can both have an effect on our health. Things that change in the environment can be affecting both animals and people. And sometimes we also have direct effect on the animals. And so there's interactions that go on between these systems on a regular basis, and having a health approach that deals with that and assesses that and can learn from that can often be really useful, both at a very local and molecular level, but at a higher sort of planetary level as well. And so what are those connections between the animal health and the human health when it comes to things like oil and gas development? Well, one is the question of, can animals be sentinels for human health hazards in the environment? So this is the idea of a canary in a coal mine. And you see here a picture of a real coal miner with a real canary. And for decades, coal miners actually took canaries down into coal mines because the animals, the canaries, were more susceptible to some of the poisonous gases like carbon monoxide in the mines. And that if the canary stopped singing and sort of fell off its perch, that was an early warning that there was a buildup of gas and the miner needed to do something about it. And that concept's been extended to other situations where animals that we're in close proximity to could be warning us about something in the environment. So example is household pets who get lead poisoning because they eat the dirt that has lead in it in our house. Livestock might be potential sentinels, wildlife. Remember that when we talk about an environment, so say an outdoor environment, Americans and many people don't spend that much time actually outside every day now, but animals who don't have a choice tend to spend much more time in particular environments. So they could be at greater exposure risk. And they have shorter lifespans, which means that anything that affects mortality or affects a next generation reproductive effects, you might see sooner in an animal than you would see in a human. At the same time, we haven't been doing this in a scientific way forever, so that we don't know quite as much about a biomarker for an exposure, for instance, in an animal compared to more experience with it in humans. So the science is still developing for animals to be sentinels for human health hazards. And another issue to think about with oil and gas extraction and development activities is the issue of food safety, because many of the animals that we are in contact with and many of the animals that live near oil and gas exploration are actually being raised for food. They could be raised for beef, could be dairy, could be something else like that. And one question is, if there are environmental exposures and the animals could be uptaking certain chemicals into their bodies, what's the chance that that could actually end up in our food, that it could end up in our meat, could end up in our dairy? And so this is a concern of the Departments of Agriculture and things like that. And there's something actually called the Food Animal Residue Avoidance Data Bank, which published a paper saying that someone needs to kind of pay attention to the issue of food safety of animals around oil and gas activities. So it's something that we still have not totally, again, figured out the science of what residues should we even look for. Is there an association with oil and gas? But it's another example of why we may want to really care more about animal health, because eventually this sometimes ends up in our food supply as well. So we were contacted by a group in Southwest Pennsylvania around the same time that those scientific reports that I mentioned were coming out, by a group who said, look, we need some people to come and study the problem in our community. We're concerned there's a lot of fracking going on, there's a lot of wells being drilled, and we have concern about both what the people are saying as well as animals, and we'd like you to actually study both. So at that point, I was at Yale University, and we were asked to sort of put together a team and work with local agencies as well in Southwestern Pennsylvania, and try to do a study and assess both people and animals in the context of proximity to fracking activities there for natural gas. So I'm just going to sort of tell a little bit about what has come out of those studies and what they may show for the future in terms of using a One Health approach to think about oil and gas health impacts from development. So this was the Washington County in Pennsylvania, sort of down in the southwest corner, really getting into sort of the Appalachian region in southwest Pennsylvania, starting to be very hilly and somewhat mountainous, but also very rural and sort of agricultural. So we selected townships within the county that would be not on the border, so that we could really look at the periphery. We had data on Pennsylvania about wells. We didn't have quite as much data from adjoining states, so we sort of honed in on a little bit of the more central areas of the county. And there were publicly available maps of where the gas wells had been drilled. And you can see there's quite a bit of activity going on, hundreds of wells, and certain areas that there was a concentration of wells going on. So we tried to do sort of a township by township selection of households randomly across these townships to pick up households where they were both very close to a well or a concentration of wells, but also some households that were in areas where there were very few wells, so that we'd have within our sample highly exposed and lesser exposed households, using geographical proximity to a gas well as a proxy for everything else related to fracking, like the diesel exhaust and the fracking ponds and things like that. So we didn't have data on every aspect of the activities, but we did know where the wells were. And we also looked for households that were not getting municipal water, but that were getting well water, so that if there was a chance of contamination of water supplies, which is one of the concerns, we might pick that up in our sample. So we ended up with a bunch of households that all the green were the households that we attempted to go and survey. And because there were so many wells around, about 50% of these households really were within 2 kilometers of a gas well. So there's just plenty of houses in proximity, and a bunch of households that weren't that close to a gas well as well. And we went and basically knocked on the door and asked a lot of questions about whether people were noticing any particular medical problems, both the person who answered the door and for anybody else in the house. We also asked about the animals at the same time. And what we found was that certain conditions were not any more frequent in people living close to a well versus farther away. But some conditions, such as skin irritation, skin rashes, skin problems in general, and upper respiratory symptoms like coughing and feeling irritated throat and feeling irritated eyes, these were much more common in people living less than 1 kilometer away from a gas well. So these were highly significant findings, and out of really about close to 100 households and a couple hundred people who were living in those households. And again, by doing this in a somewhat randomized way, we were pretty certain that this is a signal that something really could be going on. And we published that in Environmental Health Perspectives. But the question is, what about the animals? And were the animals showing any symptoms or signs as well? And so we separately analyzed what people said about their animals. And one thing we noticed was that there were simply a lot of animals. When you go to a somewhat rural area and ask about whether you have pets in the house, whether you have pets that kind of roam loose in the countryside, like a dog or a cat that spends a lot of time outside, whether you have some kind of livestock in the backyard, which often happens even in fairly small farms. You just have a lot of backyard animals as well. And when we looked at these 157 households or so, which is about how many we use for the human studies, we found that we're all of a sudden talking about 2,000 animals or more. So that asking about animals gives you kind of access to herd information as well as individual animals, that all of a sudden you sort of access all these other populations that if you don't ask about, you may not really hear. And one of the things about a rural area is that people are often very concerned with the health of their animals. They go out and take care of them every day. If the calves are having trouble being born or there's reproductive problems, the farmer notices it, and so there's a close bond between people and their animals, and a lot of awareness, so that we think that it was certainly evident that there's lots of animals out there potentially providing a signal for us. And when we looked at things like all the animals in your backyard, of course, we're talking about 2,000 animals, we did find more reports of any condition. When you look across, cows and goats and horses and all these different species, you can expect some sort of different exposures and different issues there. But we did find some significant increase less than 2 kilometers away from a gas well, and that there could be something going on. When we looked at pets, we were a little more struck by people noticing things such as skin rashes or problems with eating or diarrhea or things like that. And again, a wide variety of things were being reported. But when we really looked at among the pets, we looked at the dogs, where we think that sometimes people are just a little more in tune to the health of their dogs than they are in tune to their cats. And there we had a very significant increase in reported conditions that was highly significant in dogs that were in a household less than 1 kilometer from a gas well. So it really seemed that people were saying, there's something wrong with my dog. I live close to a well. Or we actually didn't talk about the wells in the survey. We just knew from a map where they lived. And so they just were spontaneously volunteering that the dogs seemed to be having problems. So we did not go into a lot of detail like, you live near a well, are you sick from that? We didn't lead them that way. We just asked them about their general health and the health of their animals. So it really seemed that there was some sort of signal happening, especially when you look at an animal like dogs, where they are close enough to the owners where they get probably health issues noticed a lot. Not a lot of these people took their animals to the veterinarian. It often costs money that they don't have. And so not always veterinarian diagnosed problems, but certainly reported by owners, some of these conditions. So we published that as well. It sort of seemed to support our findings about people having respiratory and dermal problems living near a gas well. because there's a real question about awareness bias. Are you feeling sick because there's a well around there? But dogs theoretically don't read the newspaper or watch television or hear about oil and gas exploration. If they are getting sick, it's possibly more likely to be an objective thing than if somebody self-reports a symptom because they're worried about something in the environment. So we thought both of these were worth publishing, and they sort of help confirm each other. But then we went back and sort of said, well, what about the areas where the dogs are seen to be sick? Is that the same as where the people are sick? Is there sort of a comparison there? And there it got a little more complicated. We were able to, again, map out where the density of wells were. We sort of created sort of density maps of the gas wells, and you can sort of see two major areas of density here. And then we looked at where were the density of dogs reporting or having skin problems versus humans reporting skin problems. And we actually saw some difference in where a lot of the dogs seem to be having problems compared to the people. So that the blue lines are where we saw a lot of human reports of illness, with some increased intensity around where those gas wells are up in the northern part of the county. And then the animals, there was a little more there was definitely some overlap, but there was a focus of some animal problems toward the south part of the county where there was another focus of gas wells. So what does it mean when the animals and people may be sending slightly different signals? Is there possibly a difference in the exposures where the animals are showing it versus where the people are showing it, even though there's a fair amount of overlap among that? But what could be possibly different about the drilling exposures that could be, again, airborne, that could be waterborne? And so we didn't have total data on all of that. We're just looking at symptoms here. But is there something different about what's going on in the north part of the county and the south part of the county? Are the animals potentially telling us something different that we should take into account? So one way that we looked at comparing the humans and animals were to look at biomarkers, and the issue of going into our study community and actually getting some samples from participants that could be analyzed in a laboratory and show you a level of a chemical that would potentially be more objective and absolutely focus on that person than just asking about symptoms. And so we decided to look at volatile organic compounds, which could be related to a lot of the petroleum products and other chemicals related to the fracking activities. And we decided to look for that in urine samples, because urine would sort of integrate exposures over a period of time, whereas in the blood, the VOCs are very short-lived. So urine gives you a little more of an integrated assessment of exposure. And we decided to look not just at people and look at their urine, but to look at animal samples as well. And so we went to households and asked them whether we could both get a urine sample from somebody in the house, and could we get a urine sample from a dog as well. And that required a certain set of skills of going and walking around with the dog until they were ready to pee, and then putting a little cup under the dog at the right time. Sometimes the cup's on a stick. A few skills that we hadn't really learned before, but we worked with our veterinarian colleagues to do that. And we ended up with a number of different samples, which we then analyzed for about 19 different metabolites of VOCs. And when we look at all the analysis and compared it from the dogs to the humans, one thing that we were struck by, and the laboratory was struck by, they had never done dog VOCs before. In fact, there's been very limited number of studies of VOCs levels in dog urine, but that in general, for the same metabolite, the dogs were often at a higher level. And so 71% of the dogs were sort of showed some elevation relative to people. And so there was definitely something going on with VOCs in dogs. Could that be because of their different metabolism, or potentially could it be because of different exposures? But we definitely saw that discordance. And when we looked at humans versus dogs in terms of the analytes for a number of different metabolites, so these are VOC metabolites. This is what happens when the body is taking in a chemical and then breaking it down to put it into the urine, and how much you're left with. And the orange dots and lines here are for the dog levels, and the green are for the humans. And within each box, there is a relationship between distance on the x-axis and the level of the metabolite on the y-axis. And so you see that for a lot of the green, it seems like it doesn't really vary by distance. It sort of looks the same, like a straight line across. But for a lot of the orange lines, which are the dogs, it seems that there's something falling off with distance, where the farther you get away from a gas well, the lower the levels of VOCs in the dogs. Not for all metabolites, but for quite a few of them, they seem to show this drop off. And you see that more than in the humans. And could this be a signal that dogs living closer to gas wells are having more exposure to VOCs, to petroleum products, to benzene, to styrene, to other chemicals that are coming from the both diesel exhaust as well as off-gassing from the natural gas flaring operations and things like that, or potentially from groundwater as well? Is this something that really is a signal we're seeing in the animals? So the science for this is still developing, but I think that these preliminary data indicate that when you're assessing health impacts in a community, when you're looking for something that we're still trying to understand, like oil and gas exploration and its effect on health, animals potentially really are worth looking at as well. They could be sentinels. They could be more exposed. They could be have a shorter intergenerational time. You could see a signal in the animal health that you might not pick up right away in the humans. And why not include those in our assessments? And when we do studies, look at both humans, animals, and the environment at the same time, and maybe publish papers that have all that data in the same place. You notice we split our papers here. Maybe we shouldn't have. Maybe we should have put it all together. And recall too that there's an issue about food safety as well. That is another reason to sort of care about this in the animals, but we should really care that they're sort of fellow travelers with us in this shared environment that keeps changing, and that the more I think we can approach these from an integrated One Health way, the better we'll do at really understanding what's going on and taking steps to protect both our health, but also the health of the animals and the environment that we share. So one last plug as we think about canaries and coal mines and sentinels, that it's one thing to look at cows and dogs and things, but many times the workers who are actually on the drilling pads and actually right up next to all the chemicals are another overlooked group that we should, when we think about sentinel events, always think about workers as well as the animals. And there's been very few studies of occupational health in the workers. It's often very hard to access those populations. The companies don't always want studies done of the workers, and it's just hard to get access. But remember, they're important sentinels just like the animals. So I'm going to stop there and wish you a great rest of the conference, and happy to be in correspondence with anyone who wants to follow this up. We have again, a Center for One Health Research at the University of Washington, where we're happy to engage in any way with any of these issues and answer questions and be in touch with any of you. So thanks a lot.